Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into the fascinating world of Mongol China, where Genghis Khan's grandsons ran the empire, toilet paper was invented, and using coins could get you arrested. Welcome to the Yuan dynasty, where Marco Polo showed up and probably immediately regretted packing light. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just woken up in 13th century China, except it's not really China anymore. It's the Yuan dynasty, ruled by Mongol Khans who've traded their horses for silk robes and their fermented mare's milk for tea ceremonies. You're in Khanbalik, modern-day Beijing, the glittering capital of an empire that stretches from Korea to Hungary. The sun hasn't risen, but the city already hums with activity. Street vendors hawk steamed buns while government clerks shuffle past, clutching scrolls like their lives depend on it, which they probably do. This isn't the nomadic steppes where a wrong turn meant wolves. This is imperial bureaucracy, where a misfiled document could mean exile, execution, or worse, a strongly worded memo. You smell incense, sewage, horse manure, and something that might be roasted duck, or might be your neighbour's cat. In Mongol China, protein is protein, and questions about sourcing are considered impolite. Your lodging is a narrow wooden building, squeezed between a noodle shop and a fortune teller who seems suspiciously accurate about predicting tax audits. The walls are paper thin. You can hear everything: crying babies, arguments about rice prices, and someone practicing the who at 3 a.m. like they're auditioning for the imperial court. You step outside and immediately realise you have no idea how to behave. In Mongol China, every gesture, every bow, every word is a potential political statement. Bow too low, and you're a bootlicker. Bow too high, and you're disrespectful. Don't bow at all, and you're probably about to become fish food in the Grand Canal. The streets are packed. Merchants from Central Asia argue in Persian. Mongol officials bark orders in Mongolian. Chinese scholars whisper in classical Chinese. You speak none of these languages fluently, which makes navigating daily life roughly as easy as explaining democracy to a horse. Welcome to your new reality. You're a foreigner in a foreign land ruled by other foreigners who've spent decades figuring out how to govern people they don't entirely understand. And everyone, absolutely everyone, is watching to see if you'll make a mistake worth reporting to someone with a very sharp sword. In Mongol China, social mobility isn't about working hard or getting lucky. It's about being born into the right ethnic group, at the right time, in the right place. Welcome to the 4-class system, where your race literally determines your legal rights. And diversity means different types of oppression for different people. At the top sit the Mongols, the conquerors, the chosen people of the Great Khan. They don't have to take civil service exams, they don't pay certain taxes, they get the best government jobs, the finest houses, and if they murder someone, the punishment is usually a stern talking to and a small fine. Being Mongol in Yuan China is like having a diplomatic passport that also doubles as a license to steal. Next come the Simu, the coloured eye people, which sounds racist because it absolutely is. These are Central Asians, Persians, Arabs, and other non-Chinese minorities who helped the Mongols conquer China. They're the preferred administrators, tax collectors, and merchants because the Mongols trust them more than the Chinese. Which makes sense since you generally don't trust people whose country you just invaded. Third are the Hanren, northern Chinese who submitted early to Mongol rule. They're considered semi-trustworthy, which in Mongol terms means they can hold minor government positions and own businesses, but they're still watched constantly for signs of rebellion, nostalgia, or insufficient enthusiasm for their new overlords. At the bottom are the Nanren, southern Chinese who resisted the longest and are therefore considered permanent security risks. They face the harshest restrictions, the highest taxes, and the most creative punishments. If something goes wrong anywhere in the empire, it's probably their fault, even if they were nowhere near it. Your position in this hierarchy affects everything. What jobs you can hold, whom you can marry, where you can live, what weapons you can carry, and even what you're allowed to wear. Mongols get silk and gold trim. Chinese peasants get hemp and resentment. The system is designed to prevent unity among the conquered. Instead of Chinese versus Mongols, it's Northern Chinese versus Southern Chinese versus Central Asians versus Arabs. Divide and conquer, but with paperwork and colour-coded clothing restrictions. You, as a time-travelling outsider, would likely be classified as Semu if you're lucky, or Nanren if the bureaucrat processing your paperwork is having a bad day. Either way, congratulations. You're now legally inferior to people whose main qualification is that their great-grandfather owned a horse. Speaking of foreigners, let's talk about Marco Polo, the most famous European to survive Mongol China and live to write about it. Though whether he actually went there is still debated by historians who apparently have nothing better to do than argue about 13th century travel logs. According to Marco, he arrived in Khanbalik around 1275 and was immediately impressed by the wealth, organisation and sheer size of Kublai Khan's empire. The city had wide boulevards, magnificent palaces and a postal system so efficient it made European communication look like smoke signals sent by drunk monks. But what Marco doesn't mention is the culture shock. Imagine being a young Venetian merchant, raised on pasta and Christianity, suddenly thrust into a world where people eat with sticks, worship multiple gods, and consider horse meat a delicacy. His first day probably involved several humiliating mistakes, refusing to kowtow properly because genuflecting is for God, not emperors, trying to pay for noodles with Venetian ducats that no one recognised, asking for wine and being handed fermented rice liquor that tasted like regret and made him question his life choices. The language barrier alone would have been catastrophic. Medieval Chinese wasn't exactly taught in Venice. Marco probably spent his first month communicating entirely through gestures, accidentally proposing marriage to a tea merchant and declaring war on a duck vendor. Then there's the food. Chinese cuisine in the 13th century included delicacies that would make a modern food critic weep. Bird's nest soup, sea cucumbers, and various animal parts that Europeans didn't even know were edible. Marco probably survived on rice and prayer for the first few weeks until his stomach adapted to local ingredients. The social customs were equally baffling. In Venice, business was conducted with handshakes and wine. In China, it involved elaborate rituals, gift exchanges, and knowing exactly how many times to bow based on your counterpart's rank, age, and relationship to the emperor's third cousin. Marco's success wasn't because he was particularly brilliant. It was because he was adaptable, observant, and probably too stubborn to give up and go home. He learned the languages, adopted local customs, and eventually became useful enough to the Khan that he was trusted with diplomatic missions. But even after years in China, he remained an outsider. His account of his travels reads like a tourist brochure written by someone who never quite understood what he was looking at. Fascinating, colourful, but missing the deeper currents of resentment, oppression, and cultural tension that defined life under Mongol rule. Still, Marco survived, thrived, and returned to Venice with stories that Europeans dismissed as fantasy, which tells you something about both medieval China's wonders and medieval Europe's imagination. Now that you understand your place in the social hierarchy, let's talk about work. In Mongol China, your job options are limited by your ethnicity, your family background, and your willingness to collaborate with the occupying government. If you're Chinese, your career choices are farmer, craftsman, merchant, or government functionary if you're very lucky and very careful. The civil service examination system still exists, but it's been modified to favour Mongol interests. Instead of testing knowledge of Confucian classics, they're more interested in your loyalty, your usefulness, and your ability to collect taxes without triggering rebellions. Farming is the backbone of the economy, which means it's backbreaking labour for minimal reward. You wake before dawn, work until sunset, and pray that floods, droughts, locusts, or Mongol cavalry don't destroy your crops. The government takes a percentage of your harvest as tax, plus additional levies for military campaigns, public works, and whatever the local official's nephew needs for his wedding. Craftsmen have it slightly better. The Mongols appreciate skilled artisans because they produce goods for trade and tribute. If you can make silk, porcelain, or weapons, you might earn enough to avoid starvation. But your work belongs to the state first. Private customers come second, assuming there's anything left after filling government quotas. Merchants occupy a weird middle ground. Officially, they're socially inferior to farmers and scholars. Practically, they often have more money and influence than anyone except the Mongols themselves. The Yuan dynasty encourages trade because it generates tax revenue, but merchants are also suspected of espionage, smuggling, and having divided loyalties. Government work is the most dangerous career path. Yes, it offers status, steady income, and the chance to steal from your neighbours legally, but it also makes you a target. Fail in your duties and you're demoted or executed. Succeed too well and you're suspected of ambition. Stay neutral and you're accused of incompetence. It's a job where the only winning move is not to play, but unfortunately, not playing is also grounds for punishment. Speaking of punishment, Mongol justice is swift, creative, and designed to serve as public entertainment. Minor crimes result in beatings, fines, or public humiliation. Major crimes earn you a death sentence, carried out in ways that would make medieval Europeans nervous. Tax evasion might cost you a hand. Rebellion gets you executed, along with your entire family, just to be safe. Corruption is punishable by death unless you're Mongol, in which case it's called administrative flexibility. The legal system recognises different punishments for different ethnic groups. A Mongol who kills a Chinese pays a fine equivalent to the price of a donkey. A Chinese who kills a Mongol is tortured to death while their family watches. Justice is blind, but only because she's not allowed to look at your passport. Your daily routine involves work, taxes, more taxes, avoiding officials, placating officials, and trying not to do anything that could be interpreted as seditious, which includes complaining, smiling too much, or looking like you're planning something. It's exhausting, terrifying, and thoroughly dispiriting, which is exactly the point. Let's talk about food because you have to eat. And in Mongol China, eating is both an adventure and a survival challenge. The Mongol conquest has created a fascinating fusion cuisine, though fusion implies voluntary cooperation rather than culinary imperialism. Traditional Chinese cooking now shares kitchen space with Central Asian, Persian, and Mongol influences. The result is a menu that would confuse a modern Chinese restaurant and probably violate several health codes. Rice is still the staple in the south, wheat noodles in the north. But now, you'll also find flatbread, lamb dishes, and fermented dairy products that smell like they've been buried underground for months, which they sometimes have been. Street food is abundant and risky. Vendors sell steamed buns filled with pork, beef, or mystery meat that might be dog, cat, or something that used to have hooves. Food safety regulations exist mainly in the imagination of optimistic bureaucrats. If you don't get food poisoning at least once a month, you're either incredibly lucky or not eating enough. The wealthy dine on elaborate banquets featuring dishes that showcase both ingredients and the chef's creativity. Bird's nest soup, shark fin stew, roasted duck with plum sauce. These meals are political events disguised as dinner parties, where every course sends a message about your host's wealth, connections, and opinion of your social status. Tea culture has reached new heights of complexity. There are teas for every occasion, every season, every mood. Green tea for meditation, black tea for business meetings, jasmine tea for poetry readings, and special blends that cost more than most people's annual income. The tea ceremony itself is a form of diplomatic communication where the slightest error in preparation or serving can be interpreted as an insult worth starting a war over. Alcohol comes in many forms, most of them dangerous. Rice wine is the standard, but you'll also find grape wines from Central Asia, fermented mare's milk from the steppes, and various grain alcohols that could strip paint or clean wounds with equal efficiency. Drinking is mandatory at social gatherings, but getting drunk is a serious breach of etiquette, unless you're Mongol, in which case it's Tuesday. Dining etiquette is a minefield. Use chopsticks correctly, or be labelled a barbarian. Know which dishes to eat first, which to save for last, and which to politely refuse without offending your host. Point your chopsticks at someone, and you've just declared them your mortal enemy. Leave rice in your bowl, and you're wasteful. Finish everything, and you're implying your host is cheap. Spices are expensive and political. Black pepper from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, and saffron from Persia all represent trade relationships that could shift with a single diplomatic incident. Using the wrong spice in the wrong dish could accidentally insult an entire kingdom. Food storage is primitive and unpredictable. No refrigeration means everything is either fresh, preserved, pickled, or potentially lethal. You learn to identify the warning signs of spoilage, though by then it's usually too late. And then there's the constant threat of famine. Bad harvests, floods, or military campaigns can empty the markets overnight. Food hoarding is illegal, but necessary. Black markets thrive, and suddenly that bowl of suspicious soup starts looking like a banquet. Eating in Mongol China isn't just about nutrition. It's about survival, diplomacy, and constantly proving you belong in a world that's already decided you probably don't. What you wear in Mongol China isn't just about staying warm or looking attractive. It's a legal requirement, a political statement, and a constant reminder of your place in the social hierarchy. Get it wrong, and you're not just unfashionable, you're seditious. The sumptuary laws are complex, detailed, and ruthlessly enforced. These regulations specify exactly what colours, fabrics, and styles each social class can wear. Mongols get silk, gold trim, and bright colours. Chinese commoners get hemp, cotton, and earth tones. The message is clear. Even your underwear should remind you who's in charge. Mongol fashion emphasises practicality and status. Deal robes, fur hats, and leather boots designed for horseback riding and surviving steppes winters. These clothes look exotic in Chinese cities, but they serve a purpose. They immediately identify the wearer as one of the ruling class. You can spot a Mongol official from 3 blocks away, which is exactly the point. Chinese traditional clothing has been modified to accommodate Mongol sensitivities. Bright yellows are reserved for the imperial family. Certain patterns and symbols are forbidden to non-Mongols. Even the length of your sleeves sends a message about your political loyalty and social ambitions. Merchants navigate a particularly tricky middle ground. They need to dress well enough to inspire confidence in their financial success, but not so well that they attract unwanted attention from tax collectors or jealous officials. It's a delicate balance between prosperity and prudence. Hairstyles are equally regulated. Mongol men often wear their hair in traditional styles with elaborate braids. Chinese men are encouraged to adopt modified versions that show respect for Mongol customs without completely abandoning their own traditions. Get the balance wrong, and you're either a cultural sellout or a dangerous traditionalist. Women's fashion is even more complicated. Mongol women enjoy relatively high status and freedom, reflected in their clothing styles. Chinese women face restrictions based on their social class, their husband's occupation, and their family's political reliability. A woman wearing clothes above her station isn't just breaking fashion rules, she's challenging the entire social order. Jewellery serves as both decoration and identification. Certain metals, stones, and designs are restricted by law. A Chinese artisan wearing a silver bracelet might be showing off their wealth. The same bracelet on a Chinese peasant could be evidence of theft, tax evasion, or seditious behaviour. Seasonal changes add another layer of complexity. Winter clothes must be warm enough to survive Chinese weather, but appropriate to your social class. Summer clothes must be light enough to prevent heat stroke, but modest enough to avoid accusations of impropriety or foreign influence. Footwear tells its own story. Leather boots for Mongols, cloth shoes for Chinese officials, straw sandals for peasants. The quality, style, and condition of your shoes immediately broadcast your status, wealth, and ethnic background to anyone who cares to look. Foreign fashions are viewed with suspicion. Marco Polo's European clothes probably marked him as an exotic curiosity, but they also made him a walking advertisement for foreign influence. Smart foreigners quickly adopted local styles, though never quite correctly enough to avoid standing out. The result is a population dressed like a colour-coded filing system, where your outfit serves as your identification card, your political registration, and your tax bracket, all rolled into one carefully regulated package. Getting dressed each morning isn't just about looking presentable, it's about navigating a complex web of legal requirements, social expectations, and political implications. One wrong choice, and your wardrobe becomes evidence in your treason trial. Communication in Mongol China is like navigating a linguistic obstacle course designed by someone with a sense of humour and a law degree. The Yuan dynasty officially recognises multiple languages, which sounds progressive until you realise it's actually a control mechanism disguised as diversity. Mongolian is the language of power. Government documents, military orders, and imperial decrees are written in Mongolian script, often adapted from Uyghur or Arabic writing systems, because the Mongols were too busy conquering people to develop their own alphabet. If you want to advance in government service, you need to speak Mongolian fluently enough to understand orders, file reports, and grovel convincingly. Chinese remains the language of daily life for most of the population, but it's been modified to accommodate Mongol rule. New words have been borrowed from Mongolian and Persian. Old words have acquired new meanings that often relate to submission, taxation, or the inevitability of foreign rule. Classical Chinese, the language of scholars and literature, is still used but viewed with suspicion as a potential vehicle for seditious thoughts. Persian serves as the language of administration and trade. Many of the Semu class officials are Persian speakers who handle tax collection, merchant regulation, and diplomatic correspondence. Learning Persian can open doors, but it also marks you as a collaborator in the eyes of Chinese traditionalists. Arabic is the language of Islamic law and scholarship, important in certain regions and among specific communities. It's useful for trade with Central Asian merchants, but speaking it fluently might raise questions about your religious loyalties and political affiliations. Then there are the regional dialects, which have multiplied and diverged under Mongol rule. Northern Chinese dialects reflect Mongol influence. Southern dialects preserve more traditional forms, but are viewed as potentially rebellious. Local languages and tribal dialects continue to exist, but are systematically discouraged through education policies and administrative requirements. Written communication is even more complex. different scripts for different purposes, different languages, different audiences. A single document might require multiple versions: Mongolian for official records, Chinese for local implementation, Persian for trade implications, and Arabic for religious considerations. Translation errors are common and often deliberately exploited. A tax regulation written in Mongolian might be translated into Chinese with subtle modifications that increase the tax burden or expand the scope of enforcement. By the time the discrepancy is discovered, the money has already been collected and the translator has mysteriously disappeared. Code switching becomes a survival skill. You speak Mongolian to officials, Chinese to neighbours, Persian to merchants, and whatever local dialect is necessary to buy food or avoid getting robbed. Each conversation requires mental calculations about appropriate language, tone, and level of formality. Cultural references are linguistic landmines. A Chinese proverb might be interpreted as criticism of Mongol rule. A Mongolian saying could offend Chinese sensibilities. Persian poetry might be seen as foreign propaganda. Even weather commentary can be politically dangerous if it's interpreted as metaphorical criticism of current conditions. Humour doesn't translate well, which is a serious problem in a society where tensions run high and misunderstandings can be fatal. A joke that's hilarious in Chinese might be incomprehensible in Mongolian and treasonous in Persian. Sarcasm is particularly risky because it requires cultural context that might not exist across ethnic and linguistic boundaries. Names become weapons of cultural preservation and political control. Mongol names for Chinese places replace traditional names. Chinese officials adopt Mongolian-sounding names to advance their careers. Merchants use different names in different languages to appeal to various customer bases. The result is a society where communication is constantly filtered through multiple layers of linguistic, cultural, and political interpretation. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every document is a potential trap. And every word you speak might be your last if you choose the wrong language at the wrong time with the wrong person. Learning to navigate this linguistic maze isn't just about communication. It's about survival in a world where your accent might reveal your origins, your vocabulary might betray your loyalties, and your grammar mistakes might be interpreted as acts of rebellion. Education in Mongol China serves two primary purposes: creating useful bureaucrats and eliminating dangerous thoughts. The traditional Chinese education system, based on Confucian classics and civil service examinations, has been modified to serve Mongol interests while maintaining the illusion of continuity. Schools now teach Mongolian history alongside Chinese literature. Students learn about Genghis Khan's conquests with the same reverence once reserved for ancient Chinese emperors. The message is clear: resistance is futile, submission is wisdom, and your new overlords are historically inevitable. The curriculum emphasizes practical skills over philosophical speculation. Accounting, tax law, and administrative procedures take precedence over poetry and metaphysics. Students learn to calculate tribute payments, draft legal documents, and communicate in multiple languages. These skills make them useful to the state and too valuable to execute for minor infractions. Confucian education continues, but with significant modifications. The traditional emphasis on virtuous resistance to corrupt rulers has been carefully edited out. Students now learn a version of Confucianism that emphasizes obedience, harmony, and acceptance of hierarchical authority. It's Confucius with the revolutionary potential surgically removed. Buddhist and Taoist education flourishes under Mongol rule, partly because these traditions are less politically threatening, and partly because the Mongols appreciate their emphasis on acceptance and non-resistance. Monasteries become centers of learning that teach literacy, mathematics, and moral philosophy while carefully avoiding topics that might inspire rebellion. Islamic education serves the Semu community and provides connections to the broader Mongol Empire's administrative networks. Madrasas teach Arabic, Islamic law, and administrative skills that are valuable throughout the Mongol domains. Students who excel in Islamic studies often find employment in the imperial bureaucracy. The examination system still exists but has been restructured to favour Mongol interests. Questions about military strategy focus on Mongol tactics. Essays about governance emphasise the benefits of foreign rule. Historical topics carefully avoid examples of successful resistance to foreign invasion. Textbooks are rewritten to reflect the new political reality. Chinese history now begins with the Mongol conquest, or at least treats it as the natural and inevitable culmination of all previous events. Traditional heroes are reinterpreted as proto-Mongols who understood the benefits of submission to superior leadership. Teacher training includes instruction in political reliability and cultural sensitivity. Educators learn to identify subversive thoughts, report suspicious students, and modify traditional teachings to support current policies. The profession attracts collaborators, true believers, and people desperate enough to accept any employment that doesn't involve manual labour. Student surveillance is institutionalised through peer reporting systems and regular political evaluations. Academic achievement is balanced against ideological conformity. Brilliant students who ask uncomfortable questions about foreign rule often find themselves assigned to remote positions where their talents can't inspire others. Literacy campaigns target specific populations and specific skills. Mongol officials learn enough Chinese to govern effectively. Chinese administrators learn enough Mongolian to serve loyally. Merchants learn multiple languages to facilitate trade, but comprehensive education, the kind that might inspire political awareness and resistance, is carefully limited. Advanced education is reserved for the politically reliable and ethnically acceptable. Chinese students can achieve high academic honours, but the highest positions require Mongol ancestry or demonstrated loyalty to Mongol interests. Merit matters, but not as much as blood and politics. Research topics are carefully controlled. Historical studies focus on successful integration of diverse peoples under enlightened foreign leadership. Scientific research emphasises practical applications that benefit the state. Philosophical inquiry is directed toward questions of obedience, harmony, and the benefits of cultural exchange under Mongol supervision. The result is an educational system that produces competent administrators who lack the intellectual tools to question their condition. Students graduate literate, numerate, and politically neutered. They can serve the state efficiently, but they can't imagine alternatives to foreign rule. Education becomes a form of intellectual colonization that's more effective than military conquest. You don't need to station troops in every classroom when the curriculum itself teaches students to police their own thoughts. Religious life in Mongol China is a complex mixture of tolerance, exploitation, and political calculation. The Mongols, coming from a shamanistic background, approach religion pragmatically. All gods might be real, so it's wise to keep them all happy, but some gods have more useful followers than others. Buddhism receives special favour because Buddhist monks are useful administrators and because Buddhism emphasises acceptance of suffering and hierarchy. Tibetan Buddhism particularly benefits from Mongol patronage, creating a political alliance that lasts for centuries. Monasteries receive land grants, tax exemptions, and political protection in exchange for providing educated administrators and spiritual legitimacy for Mongol rule. Chinese Buddhism adapts to serve Mongol interests. Temples add prayers for the emperor's health and the empire's prosperity. Buddhist philosophy emphasizes karma, suggesting that Chinese suffering under foreign rule is the natural consequence of past actions. Resistance becomes not just futile, but spiritually counterproductive. Confucianism survives as a social philosophy, but loses its political edge. The traditional Confucian mandate of heaven, which justified rebellion against corrupt rulers, is reinterpreted to support the status quo. Confucian scholars argue that foreign rule can be legitimate if it promotes peace, prosperity, and moral order. It's Confucianism with a Stockholm Syndrome twist. Taoism flourishes because it's politically harmless and appeals to Mongol shamanic sensibilities. Taoist emphasis on harmony, balance, and non-interference makes it ideal for a conquered population. Taoist masters often serve as advisors on natural phenomena, calendar reform, and medical practice. Islam enjoys protected status because Muslim merchants and administrators are valuable to the empire. Mosques are built in major cities, and Islamic law governs Muslim communities. However, Islamic concepts of ummah and resistance to infidel rule are carefully monitored and occasionally suppressed. Christianity arrives with Central Asian Christians and later European missionaries. Nestorian Christianity has a long history in Central Asia and China, and some Mongol nobles convert. The religion's emphasis on otherworldly salvation and obedience to earthly authority makes it politically acceptable. Shamanism, the traditional Mongol religion, maintains prestige at court, but doesn't spread widely among the Chinese population. Shamanic practices influence official ceremonies and military rituals, and shamans serve as advisors on spiritual matters and weather prediction. Folk religion adapts and persists. Local gods and spirits acquire new stories that accommodate foreign rule. Traditional festivals continue, but with modified meanings that emphasize unity under Mongol leadership rather than Chinese cultural identity. Religious syncretism becomes common as different traditions borrow from each other under imperial pressure. Buddhist temples might include Confucian tablets, Taoist shrines, and shamanic symbols. This mixing isn't entirely voluntary. It's often mandated by officials who want to demonstrate imperial harmony. Persecution occurs when religion becomes politically threatening. Chinese religious movements that emphasize restoration of native rule or resistance to foreign influence face suppression. Religious leaders who can't adapt their message to support Mongol legitimacy often find themselves exiled, imprisoned, or worse. Religious institutions become arms of state control. Temples and monasteries serve as information networks, reporting centers, and propaganda distribution points. Religious festivals become opportunities for political education and loyalty demonstrations. Conversion pressure varies by region and ethnicity. Mongol officials sometimes convert to local religions for political advantage. Chinese subjects might adopt foreign religious practices to demonstrate loyalty or gain access to opportunities. Religious education is carefully monitored and controlled. Theological training emphasizes political loyalty alongside spiritual development. Religious texts are edited or reinterpreted to support imperial ideology. The result is a religious landscape that appears diverse and tolerant, but actually serves state interests. Multiple gods, one political message. Resistance is spiritually futile. Submission is divinely ordained. And foreign rule represents cosmic harmony rather than political oppression. Faith becomes another tool of control, more subtle than taxation, but equally effective. When your gods tell you to obey foreign rulers, rebellion becomes not just politically dangerous, but spiritually damning. Law enforcement in Mongol China operates on the principle that justice should be swift, public, and memorable. The legal system combines Mongol traditional law, Chinese statutory law, and creative improvisation by officials who understand that their job security depends on maintaining order through any means necessary. Crime categories reflect the political realities of foreign rule. Sedition and rebellion top the list of serious offences, followed by tax evasion, counterfeiting currency, and insulting officials. Murder, theft, and assault are serious crimes, but often punished less severely than political offences. The ethnic hierarchy affects every aspect of criminal justice. A Mongol who kills a Chinese pays a fine equivalent to the price of a good horse. A Chinese who kills a Mongol faces execution along with their entire family, plus confiscation of property and public humiliation of their ancestors. Justice isn't blind, it's colour-coded. Punishments are designed to serve multiple purposes: deterrence, retribution, entertainment, and political education. Public executions become community events, with vendors selling snacks and officials delivering speeches about the benefits of law and order under enlightened foreign rule. Torture is both investigative tool and punishment. Confession under torture is considered more reliable than voluntary admission of guilt, probably because people will say anything to make the pain stop. Torture techniques are standardized and regulated because even brutality requires proper administration. Corruption among officials is technically illegal, but practically inevitable. The system operates on the understanding that everyone steals a little, but stealing too much or getting caught stealing is unacceptable. Officials learn to take bribes discreetly, skim taxes carefully, and share profits with their superiors. Trial procedures vary by social class and ethnic background. Mongol defendants receive formal hearings with multiple witnesses and appeals processes. Chinese defendants often face summary judgment based on the testimony of a single accuser. Evidence matters less than social status and political connections. Prisons are temporary holding facilities rather than long-term punishment institutions. Most criminals are either executed, fined, beaten, or assigned to forced labour projects. The prison system can't afford to feed inmates indefinitely, so justice must be swift and final. Capital punishment comes in various forms depending on the crime and the criminal's status. Beheading for serious crimes, strangulation for lesser offences, and more creative methods for treason, sedition, or particularly offensive behaviour. The method sends a message about both the crime and the criminal. Forced labour serves as both punishment and economic development. Criminals build roads, dig canals, construct buildings, and work in mines. The death rate is high, but the projects get completed and serve as visible reminders of what happens to people who break the law. Collective punishment ensures that entire communities police themselves. If someone commits a serious crime, their family, neighbours, and local officials might all face penalties. This system encourages self-policing and creates networks of mutual surveillance. Appeal processes exist but are limited and expensive. Most defendants can't afford the bribes necessary to get their cases reviewed by higher courts. Those who can afford appeals often discover that their original punishment was relatively lenient compared to what they receive after irritating appellate judges. Legal representation is informal and often counterproductive. Advocates who argue too vigorously for their clients might be accused of obstructing justice or harbouring seditious sympathies. Smart lawyers learn to negotiate quietly rather than argue publicly. Evidence standards are flexible and political. Confessions obtained through torture are valid. Testimony from ethnic minorities might be discounted. Physical evidence is interpreted through the lens of political reliability and social status. The legal system serves as a tool of social control that goes far beyond preventing crime. It reinforces ethnic hierarchies, demonstrates the consequences of political resistance, and provides entertainment that distracts the population from their political grievances. Justice becomes a performance where the verdict is often predetermined, but the process serves important political and social functions. The law exists not to protect the innocent, but to maintain order and remind everyone who holds the power of life and death. Entertainment in Mongol China serves multiple purposes: political distraction, cultural assimilation, and social control. The government understands that a population with leisure activities is less likely to spend time plotting rebellion, so festivals, performances, and sporting events receive official support and careful regulation. Traditional Chinese opera continues, but with modified stories that emphasize themes acceptable to Mongol sensibilities. Ancient tales of resistance to foreign invaders are replaced with stories about the benefits of cultural exchange and the wisdom of accepting superior leadership. Heroes who once fought foreign oppressors now fight domestic corruption or supernatural threats. Mongol cultural performances are introduced and promoted throughout the empire. Traditional Mongol music, featuring throat singing and horsehead fiddles, becomes part of official ceremonies and public festivals. Chinese audiences learn to appreciate these exotic sounds, or at least pretend to enjoy them. Acrobatics and martial arts demonstrations provide exciting entertainment while serving subtle political functions. Displays of physical prowess remind audiences of Mongol military superiority, while Chinese performers demonstrate their skills within carefully controlled contexts that don't suggest military training or rebellious potential. Storytelling traditions adapt to new political realities. Traditional tales are modified to include positive references to Mongol rule, foreign wisdom, and the benefits of cultural diversity. Professional storytellers learn to read their audiences carefully, adjusting their narratives based on who's listening and who might be reporting back to the authorities. Festival celebrations become exercises in political theatre. Traditional Chinese holidays continue, but with added elements that honour Mongol traditions and imperial authority. The Lunar New Year includes prayers for the Khan's health. The Mid-Autumn Festival features displays of products from across the Mongol Empire, showcasing the benefits of imperial trade networks. Gambling flourishes despite official disapproval because it provides another outlet for social tensions. Card games, dice, and betting on animal fights give people a chance to experience excitement and risk in controlled environments. Officials tolerate gambling as long as it doesn't interfere with tax collection or work productivity. Tea house culture becomes a centre of social life and information exchange. These establishments serve as unofficial news networks where people gather to hear rumours, gossip, and carefully censored information about events across the empire. Tea house owners learn to balance their customers' desire for information with the authorities' need for social control. Sporting competitions receive official encouragement because they channel competitive instincts away from political resistance. Wrestling matches, archery contests, and horse racing provide opportunities for inter-ethnic competition that demonstrates Mongol physical superiority while giving Chinese participants a chance to excel in individual achievement. Poetry and literature continue to flourish, but within carefully defined boundaries. Writers learn to express dissatisfaction with personal circumstances rather than political conditions. Love poetry becomes a safe outlet for feelings that can't be directed toward political subjects. Music evolves to incorporate influences from across the Mongol Empire. Chinese instruments blend with Central Asian melodies and Mongol rhythms, creating new forms that serve as symbols of cultural harmony under imperial rule. Musicians who resist these changes find their careers limited and their music banned. Street performances provide entertainment for the masses while serving as information distribution networks. Puppet shows, magic acts, and comedic performances include subtle political messages alongside their entertainment value. Performers learn to embed approved propaganda within their acts while maintaining audience engagement. Religious festivals are modified to serve imperial interests. Buddhist celebrations emphasize the Buddha's teachings about acceptance and non-resistance. Taoist festivals focus on harmony and balance under wise leadership. Even folk religious celebrations are adapted to include references to imperial benevolence and divine approval of Mongol rule. Children's games and toys reflect the new political reality. Traditional games are modified to include Mongol elements, and new toys feature Mongol themes. Children learn about their place in the social hierarchy through play, internalizing lessons about ethnic differences and political submission. The result is an entertainment landscape that appears diverse and vibrant, but actually serves as a comprehensive system of political education and social control. Every song, story, and celebration reinforces the message that Mongol rule is natural, beneficial, and permanent. Entertainment becomes another form of colonization, shaping minds and hearts in ways that military conquest alone cannot achieve. When your leisure activities teach you to love your conquerors, resistance becomes not just politically dangerous, but personally inconsistent. Commerce in Mongol China operates on the principle that money talks, but ethnicity determines who gets to speak loudly. The Yuan dynasty encourages trade because it generates tax revenue, but the benefits and risks of commercial activity vary dramatically based on your position in the social hierarchy. Mongol merchants enjoy significant advantages: preferential tax rates, protection from arbitrary seizure, and access to government contracts. They often serve as intermediaries in long-distance trade, leveraging their ethnic status and political connections to profit from the empire's extensive trade networks. Semu merchants, particularly Central Asians and Persians, dominate many commercial sectors because the government trusts them more than Chinese traders. They control much of the international trade, currency exchange, and luxury goods markets. Their success breeds resentment among Chinese merchants, but also provides opportunities for partnership and collaboration. Chinese merchants face the most restrictions and the highest risks, but also represent the largest commercial population. They're subject to additional taxes, more frequent inspections, and greater scrutiny of their business practices. However, their knowledge of local markets and customer preferences makes them indispensable partners for foreign traders. The Silk Road reaches new heights of activity under Mongol protection, but the benefits flow primarily to non-Chinese merchants. Chinese producers create the goods that generate profits, but foreign traders control the distribution networks and capture most of the value. It's economic colonialism disguised as free trade. Currency systems reflect the political hierarchy and create opportunities for both profit and disaster. The government issues paper money backed by imperial authority rather than precious metals, a revolutionary concept that works as long as people trust the government. Chinese merchants who understand this system early can profit enormously, but those who resist the new currency often face bankruptcy. Banking and credit systems develop to serve the empire's commercial needs, but access varies by ethnicity and political reliability. Mongol and Semu merchants can obtain credit at favourable rates and with flexible terms. Chinese merchants pay higher interest rates and face more stringent collateral requirements. Market regulations are complex and often contradictory, creating opportunities for corruption and selective enforcement. Officials can interpret rules to favour their allies and punish their enemies. Smart merchants learn to navigate this system through bribes, partnerships, and careful political positioning. International trade brings exotic goods and ideas to Chinese markets, but also creates cultural tensions. Foreign products compete with domestic industries, and foreign merchants challenge traditional commercial relationships. The government tries to balance the benefits of trade with the need to maintain social stability. Taxation of commercial activity is both a source of revenue and a tool of political control. Tax rates vary by ethnicity, type of business, and political circumstances. Emergency levies can be imposed at any time to fund military campaigns or construction projects. Merchants must maintain cash reserves, not just for business opportunities, but for unexpected government demands. Labour relations in commercial enterprises reflect the broader social hierarchy. Mongol business owners can treat their employees with relative impunity. Chinese employers must be more careful about their treatment of workers, especially if those workers have political connections or ethnic protections. Commercial disputes are resolved through a legal system that favours politically connected and ethnically privileged parties. Chinese merchants learn to avoid formal legal proceedings when possible, relying instead on informal arbitration and community mediation. Technology transfer accelerates under Mongol rule as merchants and artisans move freely across the empire. Chinese innovations spread westward, while foreign techniques arrive in China. This exchange benefits the empire economically, but also creates competition for domestic industries and traditional crafts. Urban commercial centres become melting pots of cultures, languages, and business practices. Cities like Kanbalik and Quanzhou develop into cosmopolitan trading hubs where merchants from across the known world conduct business. These cities offer opportunities for cultural exchange, but also create social tensions and political complications. Success in commerce requires not just business skills, but political acumen and cultural sensitivity. Merchants must understand multiple legal systems, speak several languages, and navigate complex ethnic and political relationships. Those who master these skills can prosper enormously, but those who make mistakes often lose everything. The commercial economy becomes a microcosm of the broader political system. Opportunity exists, but access is determined by ethnicity, politics, and personal connections. Money can buy many things, but it can't buy equality or security under foreign rule. Technological development in Mongol China proceeds under the watchful eye of authorities who understand that innovation can be either a tool of control or a weapon of resistance. The government encourages advances that strengthen imperial power while carefully monitoring developments that might threaten political stability. Printing technology reaches new levels of sophistication under UN rule, but printed materials are strictly regulated. Government documents, official histories, and approved literature flood the market, while unauthorized publications face severe penalties. The same technology that could spread knowledge and ideas becomes a tool for distributing propaganda and maintaining ideological control. Gunpowder weapons development accelerates because the Mongols recognize their military value, but production is carefully controlled to prevent these weapons from reaching potential rebels. Artillery and early firearms give Mongol forces decisive advantages in siege warfare, while Chinese civilians are forbidden from possessing military-grade weapons. Agricultural innovations improve crop yields and farming efficiency, benefiting both peasants and the state. New irrigation techniques, improved ploughs, and better seed varieties increase food production, which supports larger populations and generates more tax revenue. The government promotes agricultural technology because it strengthens the empire without threatening political control. Textile production advances through the introduction of new techniques and materials from across the Mongol Empire. Chinese silk production incorporates Central Asian methods, Persian designs, and Mongol preferences, creating products that appeal to international markets while maintaining Chinese technical excellence. Metallurgy benefits from the exchange of knowledge between Chinese craftsmen and foreign specialists. Steel production improves, allowing for better weapons, tools, and construction materials. However, the best metallurgical knowledge is reserved for military applications and government projects. Medical knowledge expands through cultural exchange, but access to advanced treatments varies by social status and ethnicity. Mongol nobles receive the best medical care available, combining Chinese traditional medicine with treatments from Islamic and Persian traditions. Chinese peasants make do with folk remedies and prayer. Astronomical and mathematical developments serve both scientific and political purposes. Accurate calendars and celestial observations are essential for agricultural planning and religious ceremonies, but they also provide the government with tools for predicting eclipses and other phenomena that can be interpreted as omens, supporting or threatening imperial authority. Engineering projects showcase the empire's power while providing practical benefits. The Grand Canal is extended and improved, connecting northern and southern China more efficiently. Road networks are expanded to facilitate military movement and commercial transport. These projects employ thousands of workers while demonstrating imperial capabilities. Navigation technology advances as Chinese knowledge combines with expertise from Arab and Persian navigators. Improved compasses, charts, and shipbuilding techniques enable longer voyages and more accurate navigation, supporting the empire's maritime trade networks. Communication systems benefit from Mongol administrative innovations. The postal relay system, adapted from Mongol military communications, enables rapid message transmission across the empire. This system serves government needs but also facilitates commercial communication and cultural exchange. Industrial production expands in scale and sophistication, but ownership and control remain politically determined. Large workshops and early factories produce goods for domestic use and export, but these enterprises are typically owned by Mongol or Semu merchants with government connections. Technological secrecy becomes a tool of both espionage and protection. The government tries to prevent sensitive technologies from spreading to potential enemies while acquiring foreign innovations for imperial use. Chinese craftsmen are sometimes forbidden from sharing their knowledge with outsiders. Innovation in transportation includes improvements to carts, bridges, and urban infrastructure. Cities develop more efficient systems for moving goods and people, while rural areas benefit from better roads and river transport. These improvements support economic growth, but also enhance government control and military mobility. Educational institutions balance the promotion of useful knowledge with political indoctrination. Schools teach practical skills alongside ideological lessons, creating graduates who can serve the state effectively while remaining politically reliable. The result is a technological landscape that advances rapidly in some areas while remaining stagnant in others. Progress occurs within carefully defined boundaries that serve imperial interests without threatening political stability. Innovation becomes another tool of control, advancing the empire's goals while preventing developments that might enable resistance or independence. Technology in Mongol China demonstrates that progress isn't always progressive. When innovation serves power rather than people, advancement can actually strengthen oppression rather than liberation. Healthcare in Mongol China operates on the principle that your medical treatment depends entirely on your social status, ethnic background, and ability to pay for something better than prayer and folk remedies. The convergence of medical traditions from across the Mongol Empire creates new opportunities for healing, but access to these advances varies dramatically based on politics and privilege. Traditional Chinese medicine continues to dominate healthcare for the majority of the population, but it's now supplemented by medical knowledge from Islamic, Persian, and Mongol traditions. Doctors who can integrate these different approaches often achieve better results and higher status, while those who resist foreign medical influence find their practices limited and their reputations questioned. The four humours theory from Islamic medicine competes with Chinese concepts of qi and yin-yang balance, creating a medical environment where diagnosis and treatment depend partly on which tradition your doctor favours. Patients often receive conflicting advice from practitioners trained in different systems, leading to confusion, frustration, and occasionally accidental cures. Epidemic diseases pose constant threats to urban populations, and the government's response varies based on which social groups are affected. Outbreaks among Mongol officials trigger immediate quarantine measures and the best available medical care. Epidemics in Chinese districts often receive less attention and fewer resources. Plague prevention and treatment become matters of imperial security because disease outbreaks can destabilize entire regions. The government imports medical knowledge from Islamic lands, where physicians have developed more effective treatments for certain diseases. However, this knowledge is often restricted to treating the politically important. Surgery remains primitive and dangerous, though some advances occur through military medicine. Mongol armies bring field surgery techniques developed on the steppes, while Chinese doctors contribute knowledge of anatomy and herbal anesthetics. The combination sometimes produces better outcomes, but surgery is still often a last resort before death. Pharmaceuticals benefit from the empire's extensive trade networks, which bring medicinal plants, minerals, and animal products from across the known world. Chinese apothecaries gain access to new ingredients, but the most effective medicines are often too expensive for common people to afford. Mental health treatment varies based on cultural background and social status. Chinese tradition emphasizes balance and harmony, while Mongol shamanic practices focus on spiritual intervention. Wealthy patients might receive treatments from multiple traditions, while poor patients are often simply confined or ignored. Obstetrics and pediatric care reflect the social hierarchy in their availability and quality. Mongol noblewomen receive the best midwives and medical attention during childbirth. Chinese peasant women often give birth with minimal assistance and face higher mortality rates for both mothers and infants. Dental care is primitive across all social levels, though the wealthy can afford gold and silver tooth replacements. Most people simply endure dental problems until they become life-threatening, at which point the usual treatment involves extraction without anesthesia. Public health measures exist primarily to protect the politically important and economically valuable. Sanitation systems in wealthy districts receive attention and funding, while poor neighbourhoods often lack basic waste disposal and clean water access. Medical education becomes more cosmopolitan as students learn from teachers representing different traditions. The best medical schools attract students from across the empire, but graduation often depends as much on political reliability as medical competence. Hospital systems develop differently in various regions based on local traditions and resources. Buddhist monasteries often serve as hospitals, providing care based on religious duty rather than payment ability. Islamic hospitals follow different organisational models, while Mongol military medical systems focus on trauma treatment and epidemic prevention. Medical licensing and regulation remain inconsistent across the empire. Some regions maintain strict controls over who can practice medicine, while others allow anyone with claimed expertise to treat patients. The result is a medical marketplace where competence and quackery often compete on equal terms. Traditional healing practices persist alongside formal medicine, often providing the only healthcare available to rural and poor populations. Folk remedies, religious healing, and shamanic treatments continue to serve people who can't access formal medical care. The convergence of medical traditions creates opportunities for both advancement and exploitation. Charlatans claiming expertise in multiple medical systems can deceive patients more effectively, while genuine healers who master different approaches can provide better treatments. Disease becomes another reflection of social hierarchy, where your chances of survival depend not just on your illness, but on your ethnicity, wealth, and political connections. Medicine advances under Mongol rule, but medical equality remains as foreign a concept as democracy or human rights. Let's talk about love, marriage, and family life in Mongol China, where romance takes a backseat to politics, and your wedding day might be the most terrifying day of your life. In the Yuan dynasty, marriage isn't about finding your soulmate. It's about navigating ethnic hierarchies, political alliances, and reproductive regulations that would make a modern dating app seem like a paradise of personal freedom. Marriage laws reflect the ethnic caste system with mathematical precision. Mongols can marry anyone they want, because when you're at the top of the social pyramid, the world is your romantic oyster. They can take multiple wives, keep concubines, and divorce at will without significant legal consequences. It's like having a premium dating subscription that also comes with legal immunity. Semu marriages require more careful consideration because they're balancing cultural traditions with political advantages. Central Asian and Persian families often arrange marriages that strengthen trade relationships or administrative networks. These unions combine business partnerships with romantic relationships, which sounds unromantic until you realize that most marriages throughout history have been economic transactions disguised as love stories. Chinese marriages face the most restrictions and complications. Han Chinese are forbidden from marrying Mongols without special permission, which is rarely granted and usually involves significant bribes or political connections. Interethnic marriages between Chinese and Semu require government approval and careful documentation to ensure the children's legal status is properly recorded. The matchmaking process varies dramatically by social class and ethnicity. Mongol families often arrange marriages based on military alliances, political considerations, and the need to maintain bloodlines suitable for governing conquered peoples. These negotiations resemble diplomatic conferences more than romantic courtships. Chinese families navigate a complex web of traditional customs modified by Mongol regulations. Parents must consider not just their children's compatibility and their family's reputation, but also the political implications of various matches. Marrying into a family with questionable loyalty to Mongol rule could result in surveillance, reduced opportunities, or worse. Wedding ceremonies become exercises in political theatre where every ritual demonstrates loyalty to the imperial system. Traditional Chinese wedding customs continue, but with added elements that acknowledge Mongol authority. Buddhist ceremonies might include prayers for the emperor's health. Taoist weddings incorporate symbols of harmony under foreign rule. Dowries and bride prices reflect both traditional customs and contemporary political realities. Mongol families can demand enormous bride prices because their daughters represent access to political power and social advancement. Chinese families often struggle to provide adequate dowries while avoiding displays of wealth that might attract unwanted government attention. Divorce laws favour Mongol men overwhelmingly. They can divorce their wives for almost any reason or no reason at all, retaining property and custody of children. Chinese men face more restrictions and often must provide financial support to divorced wives, assuming they can afford the legal proceedings necessary to obtain a divorce. Domestic violence is regulated differently based on ethnic background. Mongol men who abuse their wives face minimal legal consequences, especially if their wives are Chinese. Chinese men who abuse Mongol wives can face severe punishment, including execution. Violence within the same ethnic group is often handled through family mediation rather than legal proceedings. Concubinage provides a legal outlet for sexual relationships outside marriage while maintaining social hierarchy. Wealthy Mongol and Semu men can afford multiple concubines, creating household structures that resemble small harems. Chinese men might keep concubines if they can afford them, but their concubines enjoy fewer legal protections. Childbearing becomes a matter of imperial interest because population demographics affect military recruitment, tax collection, and political stability. Families are encouraged to have children, but the children's ethnic classification affects their future opportunities and legal status. Mixed ethnicity children often face identity problems and legal complications. Child rearing practices adapt to incorporate both traditional customs and contemporary political requirements. Parents must teach their children appropriate languages, proper social behaviours, and political loyalty while preserving cultural traditions that don't conflict with imperial authority. Women's rights vary dramatically based on their ethnic background and family status. Mongol women enjoy relatively high status and can own property, initiate divorce proceedings, and participate in business activities. Chinese women face more restrictions and often depend entirely on their husbands' or fathers' political and economic status. Inheritance laws favour male heirs, but with ethnic modifications that affect property distribution. Mongol families can pass property more freely between generations. Chinese families must navigate regulations designed to prevent the accumulation of wealth that might fund political resistance. Family honour becomes a complex calculation involving traditional values and contemporary political loyalty. Families must maintain their reputations within their own communities while demonstrating appropriate submission to imperial authority. This balancing act often creates internal tensions and difficult choices. Religious considerations in marriage depend on the family's background and the political climate. Buddhist families might seek marriages that strengthen monastery connections. Islamic families navigate between religious requirements and imperial regulations. Traditional Chinese folk religion adapts to accommodate foreign oversight. Extended family networks serve as both support systems and surveillance networks. Relatives provide assistance during difficult times, but also monitor each other's behaviour for signs of political disloyalty. Family gatherings become opportunities for both celebration and careful political positioning. Widowhood presents particular challenges in a society where women's status depends heavily on their male relatives. Mongol widows often retain significant property rights and social position. Chinese widows might face poverty, social isolation, or pressure to remarry quickly for economic survival. The result is a family structure that appears traditional on the surface, but operates according to political rules that prioritize imperial stability over personal happiness. Love exists, but it must compete with ethnicity, politics, and economics for influence over people's most intimate decisions. Marriage in Mongol China demonstrates that even the most personal aspects of life become tools of political control under foreign rule. When the government regulates who you can marry, how many children you can have, and what rights your family enjoys, romance becomes another form of resistance or collaboration. Your wedding day in Yuan Dynasty China wouldn't be about promising to love, honour, and cherish until death do you part. It would be about promising to navigate ethnic hierarchies, political pressures, and reproductive regulations until the dynasty collapses or you do. The Yuan dynasty's decline doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow-motion catastrophe that unfolds over decades, driven by the same forces that made Mongol rule successful: ethnic tensions, administrative complexity, and the inherent contradictions of ruling a vast empire with a small population of conquerors. Economic pressures mount as the government struggles to balance competing demands. Military campaigns require funding, but heavy taxation provokes resistance. Public works projects demonstrate imperial power, but drain the treasury. The paper money system, innovative but fragile, begins to lose credibility as inflation erodes its value. Succession disputes weaken central authority as Mongol nobles compete for power. The traditional Mongol method of selecting leaders through consensus among tribal chiefs doesn't translate well to governing a sedentary empire. Each succession becomes a potential civil war, and each civil war provides opportunities for Chinese resistance. Cultural assimilation works both ways, and over time, Mongol rulers become more Chinese than Mongol. They adopt Chinese customs, marry Chinese nobles, and distance themselves from their nomadic origins. This adaptation helps them govern China, but alienates them from the Mongol homeland and reduces their legitimacy among traditional supporters. Administrative corruption increases as central oversight weakens. Local officials, both Mongol and Chinese, begin treating their positions as personal property rather than public trust. Tax collection becomes extraction, justice becomes arbitrary, and public service becomes private profit. Natural disasters strain the government's ability to respond effectively. Floods, droughts, and famines require massive relief efforts that the imperial treasury can't always afford. Each disaster that receives inadequate response undermines the government's claim to possess the mandate of heaven. Religious movements provide cover for political organization among the Chinese population. Buddhist and Taoist groups, officially tolerated, begin incorporating political messages into their spiritual teachings. Secret societies emerge that combine religious practice with anti-Mongol resistance. Regional autonomy increases as central control weakens. Provincial governors begin acting more independently, making decisions based on local interests rather than imperial policy. This decentralization improves regional governance in some cases, but undermines imperial unity. Military effectiveness declines as Mongol warriors become more sedentary, and Chinese troops remain politically unreliable. The army that conquered China becomes an occupation force, and occupation forces are better at oppression than warfare. When real military challenges arise, the Yuan army often proves inadequate. International pressures distract attention and resources from domestic governance. Mongol campaigns in Southeast Asia and Japan consume enormous resources while producing few benefits. These foreign adventures strain the empire's finances and military capabilities while providing no compensation for domestic problems. Social mobility decreases as the initial opportunities created by conquest are exhausted. The ethnic hierarchy hardens into a permanent caste system, reducing incentives for collaboration among Chinese elites. When the benefits of cooperation diminish, the costs of resistance begin to seem acceptable. Technological stagnation occurs as innovation becomes less important than political control. The government focuses on maintaining order rather than promoting development, and the creative energy that drove Chinese civilization begins to reassert itself in opposition to foreign rule. Cultural renaissance emerges among Chinese intellectuals who begin rediscovering and reinterpreting their classical traditions. This revival provides intellectual foundations for resistance movements and helps reconstruct Chinese identity in opposition to Mongol rule. Information networks develop among Chinese communities, spreading news, coordinating activities, and maintaining cultural connections across the empire. These networks initially commercial and social, gradually acquire political significance as resistance organizations. Leadership emerges among Chinese communities as local strongmen, religious leaders, and intellectual figures begin coordinating opposition to Mongol rule. These leaders often start with limited goals, but gradually develop broader political ambitions. The final collapse, when it comes, is swift and comprehensive. Decades of accumulated problems reach a critical mass, and the Yuan dynasty discovers that foreign rule, no matter how sophisticated, ultimately depends on the consent of the governed. When that consent is withdrawn, even the most powerful empire becomes just another historical footnote. The Yuan dynasty's end demonstrates that successful conquest is easier than successful governance, and that empires built on ethnic dominance contain the seeds of their own destruction. Foreign rule can be maintained for a time through force and administrative efficiency, but it cannot survive the long-term political and cultural dynamics that ultimately favour indigenous resistance. The Chinese who survive Yuan rule emerge with bitter experience in dealing with foreign occupation, lessons that will influence Chinese political thought and behaviour for centuries to come. The Yuan dynasty doesn't just end. It provides a masterclass in why foreign rule, no matter how enlightened, ultimately fails when it conflicts with the fundamental human desire for self-determination. So there you have it. Mongol China under the Yuan dynasty, a place where your ethnicity determined your legal rights, your career options were limited by your bloodline, and your daily survival depended on navigating a complex web of political, cultural, and linguistic obstacles that could turn fatal at any moment. You wouldn't have lasted a day, not because you're weak or incompetent, but because you lack the cultural programming necessary to function in a society built on ethnic hierarchy and political oppression. Your modern assumptions about equality, justice, and individual rights would have marked you as either dangerously naive or potentially seditious. The Yuan dynasty represents one of history's great experiments in multi-ethnic empire building, demonstrating both the possibilities and limitations of foreign rule. The Mongols created a vast, cosmopolitan empire that facilitated trade, cultural exchange, and technological advancement. They also created a system of institutionalized discrimination that ultimately undermined their own political legitimacy. The lessons of Mongol China extend beyond historical curiosity. They remind us that political systems aren't just about laws and institutions. They're about the daily experience of ordinary people trying to survive under conditions they didn't choose and can't easily change. Foreign rule, no matter how sophisticated or well-intentioned, faces inherent contradictions that ultimately lead to its downfall. The Yuan dynasty's collapse wasn't just a political event, it was the inevitable result of trying to govern a civilization while remaining fundamentally alien to it. The Chinese who lived through Yuan rule developed survival skills, cultural resilience, and political awareness that shaped Chinese civilization for centuries afterward. They learned that foreign occupation could be endured, outlasted, and eventually overcome through patience, organization, and the gradual erosion of imperial legitimacy. Perhaps most importantly, the Yuan dynasty demonstrates that human dignity and cultural identity are more powerful than military conquest and administrative efficiency. Political systems that deny these fundamental human needs may achieve temporary success, but they ultimately face the choice between adaptation and collapse. As you drift off to sleep tonight, consider how fortunate you are to live in a time and place where your ethnicity doesn't determine your legal status, where you can speak your mind without calculating the political consequences, and where justice, however imperfect, at least aspires to equality rather than hierarchy. The people of Mongol China didn't have these luxuries, but they survived, endured, and ultimately prevailed. Their story reminds us that human resilience and the desire for freedom are forces that no empire, however powerful, can permanently suppress. Sleep well, knowing that the worst thing you'll face tomorrow is probably just Monday morning traffic. Not a bureaucratic system designed to remind you daily that you're a second-class citizen in your own homeland. And remember, if you enjoyed tonight's journey through the administrative nightmares and cultural complexities of Yuan Dynasty China, there are plenty more historical disasters waiting to lull you to sleep. Because nothing says sweet dreams quite like learning about past civilizations that would have killed you for sneezing at the wrong time. Good night, everyone. May your dreams be filled with simple pleasures, like breathable air, drinkable water, and legal systems that at least pretend to treat people equally.